John. Let's talk about John. John is an interesting person, concept. Up so far, we've kind of talked about mostly Genesis characters. We've sort of touched on Revelation a little bit here, a little bit there. We've kind of gone over some concepts and a few words, and the idea that all the Bible characters are in fact nations or cultures, depending if they're male or female. But we haven't really spent significant time in the New Testament. And John is fully New Testament. I don't think there's any Johns in the Old Testament. And John's going to do a bunch of stuff. He's going to kind of lead us. He's going to prepare the way in the wilderness as we go towards Jesus. But I don't want to go straight to Jesus because it's impossible. It's 100% impossible to understand Jesus if you don't understand John. And it's 100% impossible to understand Revelation if you don't understand John. And it's almost impossible to understand anything. If you can understand what I'm going to say, you can I think it should get you there. I think. So one of the interesting things about John is that there isn't a John. There kind of is this idea of one John, but yet the New Testament gives us many Johns, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But the game I'm playing, the way I'm understanding this, is you can have more than one John and be the same John. And I'm saying John is France. And we haven't done too much of this. We've done a little bit, but in France is interesting. So we're going to get into how all of this works and why I would say such a dumbass thing like John is France. Clearly I'm mad. Clearly I'm out of my mind. But what if I'm not? What if you look at this video like, what if he's right? What's he saying? How's this possible? So, let's take a look. The curious thing about John is if you are in, well, first off, we love the name meanings, right? What the names mean is oftentimes an indicator of where we're going. In this case, John simply means Jehovah bestows mercifully, Jah is gracious, grace and mercy of the Lord, dove-like meekness, compassion, fertility, fruitless love. And that's about as unhelpful of anything as I can think, just as a quick definition. But a curious thing, if you just want to take little notes to put to the side, and when I say more outlandish things as we go along, which you will dismiss out of hand without even considering even a little tiny bit, even though I'm going to bring receipt after receipt after receipt. And you're going to deny and deny and deny. But if you didn't deny, one of the things that I'm going to show you is that both Jehovah and Jah are brought up. And that's interesting. It doesn't mean anything yet, but it is interesting. And I want you to see words like dove, meek, compassion, love, fruitfulness, fertility. These words sound like they belong to a different person. They almost sound like they belong to Jesus. But we're not talking about Jesus, and we're clearly going to prove that we're not talking about Jesus. But yet somehow it feels like we're talking about Jesus. But let's move on. If you get into early Christian studies, you'll start seeing that things are broken up into camps. And one of those camps is the Johannine camp, the Johannine community. This idea that there was a group of people that are responsible for things like John and First John. Maybe even Revelation is hard to say. But the Johannine Christianity, they assert the existence of a community of Johannine literature, and they allege that these early followers of Jesus define themselves rather starkly against the Jewish milieu in which they arose. These believers cultivated an intense devotion to Jesus as the definitive revelation of God's salvific will. They understood themselves to be in intimate contact with Him and with one another under the guidance of the Spirit Paraclet. They were conscious of the relationship to other believers with whom they hoped to be in eventual union. Their piety found distinctive expression in a reflective literary corpus that explored new ways of expressing faith in Jesus. But they were kind of on their own, and eventually they got into a row with the other ones. But the Johannine tradition received a respected role in the emerging great church, the interconnected web of believers throughout the Mediterranean that provided mutual support and maintained fellowship under the leadership of emerging episcopal authorities. The Johannine community of the first century, just remember how far back they are attesting this group of people go, bequeathed to the universal church its distinctive literary corpus and estimation of Jesus, which came to dominate the development of later Christian orthodoxy. Other representatives of the Johannine Christianity, nurturing alternate strands of tradition, influence various second century movements characterized by their opponents and much more modern scholarship as Gnostics. That's all I've got to say about that. There's a whole early subworld of John and James and Peter and Gnostics and various other groups that sort of form this, how do I put this? It's sort of like a web of weirdness that scholars are still trying to untangle as to, like, the curious thing is there's no doubt that Christianity exists, There's no doubt that at some point it became a rather large force on the earth, but there is a doubt as to how in the fuck that even came to be. And nobody can really have a good answer. We've done another video where they're not even really sure what to make of Jesus. Was he just a guy? Was he a real thing? Is it all a myth? It's hard to say. However, I have a different view on all of that, but I just want you to see. And they're gonna ascribe ownership of the book of John and First John for sure to probably First and Second John. I think, is it First, Second, Third John? The Johns all go to the Joannian Gnostic group. And another curious thing is if you study the Gospels, right? There's 4 Gospels. However, the way they teach the Gospels is you have the 3 synoptic Gospels in John, which is all by itself in its own little world, unlike the other 3. Even though the stories are similar, it's its own special thing. Like the 3 synoptic gospels will essentially attempt to tell the same stories. They'll do it slightly different, where John will just come at it totally from a different angle. Everything's from a different angle. Nothing's quite the same. It's curious. I'm not even giving you any answers. It's just curious. Right, some more stuff on the Joannian epistles. Who wrote what? Who gets to say what? Where they're coming from? What the community's about? But then you start getting into like things we can actually define. Right, we can say that there is John the Beloved, John the Revelator, John the Apostle, John the Evangelist. In fact, there's 5 Johns in the New Testament. John the Baptist, John the father of Peter, John the Apostle, John Mark, John, a member of the high priest family. And all of these, curiously, are considered to be different people. Now, that's not how I do it. What I would say is they are all the same person at different points, in different moments, with different aspects. I'm just going to lay that there. I'm just peppering you with things right now. I'm not giving you the big stuff yet, but an important piece of pepper is, according to the Gospels, there's only one of the 12 that is claimed to be at the cross during the crucifixion. And that would be John. But to start all this, to really begin our journey into this, in fact, is probably what we're going to spend most of our time on this time, is this curious case of John the Baptist. Who is John the Baptist? Now, what I love is I've just gone ahead and selected a few images, because images are always helpful, of John the Baptist. And like Jesus, it's almost like Jesus had a rough night. But there's this weird connection between the way John is always shown and Jesus is always shown. But John the Baptist is always like Esau, a hairy guy. And almost red and hairy in this case, interestingly enough. Here he's a little less long-haired, right? He's a little less than this guy. And I'm not really sure who John the Baptist is. This is an AI image, clearly, and sometimes AI gets a little wonky. I'm thinking this is John, but this could be John. It almost looks like the same guy in two different poses. It doesn't really matter. You get this image. You get this John in the water baptizing. John, look. Again, almost like this, almost the same. Just one is wild and one is beautiful. So this is a painting of John the Baptist, and yet it is attributed to Bacchus. And I say all that because in addition to peppering you with images of a hairy, untamed man, I've been peppering you with images of Dionysus. But what you need to know is Dionysus is the Greek name. Bacchus is the Roman name. So if you see Bacchus and you see Dionysus, it's referring to the same person, concept, idea. And at some point, somebody went ahead and just connected Dionysus to John. And that says a lot right there. That says almost as much as I can ever say in a long-winded 2-hour ordeal. There's a lot of connection between Dionysus and John. But let's continue. More John, more hairy, crazy wilderness John, and all of the people gathered around to listen to him. Here's John the Baptist after he had his head removed. Now, my claim, literally my claim at the beginning of this little slideshow, is that John is France. But France is an interesting idea. In fact, France is a very interesting thing. It's almost Germany level interesting. It's almost Rome level interesting. There's a lot of firsts that happen with France. France is called France because it is a weird version of the word Franks. And the Franks were some of the Germanic tribes that ultimately were based and responsible to an extent of some of the fall of the Roman Empire, but they were not, yes, they were helpful in that, but they're more well known as their, like, some of the first new, we could call them barbarian kings that began to arise in the wake of the vacuum created by the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And this one's fun. A key turning point in this evolution was when the Frankish Merovingian dynasty first became the rulers of the whole region between the Loire and the Rhine, and subsequently imposed power over many other post-Roman kingdoms, both inside and outside. The interesting part here is the Merovingian dynasty. And it's interesting because for the most part, while I talk about weird things, in a sense, I'm only talking about the Bible for the most part, for now. I've avoided, to an extent, going down the normal roads of esoterica, if you will. And if you ever watched the Da Vinci Code, you would know that the entire point of that movie was to claim that the Merovingian bloodline, in fact, held the key to Jesus. Only it did it through the Holy Grail of Mary Magdalene and Jesus being wed and some secret ceremony and the lineage being protected and hidden so that Tom Hanks had to get shot at and some French actor had to save him. But it was talking about literalness, right? So it's another one of those, like, it begs the question, are there a group of people that tell you literal and understand the symbolic, or is even the symbolic stuck in a literal mindset? Because I can say this much, in like an Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of way, depending on your perspective, Vader did in fact betray and kill your father, Anakin Skywalker. Like, from the right angle, the Holy Grail and Jesus and the Merovingian bloodline do in fact hold the secret of Jesus. But it's not through a lady, it's not through a man, it's not through people, it's not through humans, it's through nations. So to understand the Bible and to understand John, and therefore the entire Merovingian bloodline, what you would really need to be looking at is the person called John is the people called Franks. But the French are still here. What did Jesus say? If I choose to let John live until I return, that's my deal. France still lingers with us, which is interesting. France was the Merovingians, then France was the Kingdom of France, and then France was the first non-kingdom European country, and we'll get into that a lot. And so let's just hold right there. In addition to the Merovingians, it was also the Carolingians, the Carolingian Empire, the one that ultimately led to Charlemagne, right? So the Merovingians gave way to the Carolingians, and that led to let me just say this. It is impossible to get your head around everything in the New Testament. The book of Revelation, Jesus, if you don't understand Charlemagne. And Charlemagne is not a small figure. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Charlemagne is, we'll see here in just a second. So Charlemagne, right, here's the Frankish Empire, right? So he ultimately, even though he's considered Carolingian, he is a Frankish king. Frankish Empire, right? So he created the largest empire of Europe since Rome. out of the chaos of the Dark Ages, right? Out comes Charlemagne exerting himself, and he's an entire figure that needs its own special, like, I just want to kind of skirt on him. And when I do, I'll cover this better, but this city right here is not a well-known city today. But at the time, like, you've all heard of Paris, you all know Rome, but few people know of Aachen. And Aachen was the sometime on again, off again capital of the Frankish Empire. It was definitely the home of Charlemagne, and in German it means water. Again, here's the Frankish Empire and the people that are attached to the Frankish Empire, or the Carolingian Empire. A curious thing that will become super important. And I say all this because I thought about just kind of like, how do I do this quickly? But I don't know how you do this quickly. I don't even know how you do this, right? I don't know how this is going to get done, but we're going to give it a shot. Charlemagne, in addition to being the Frankish king, the main person of the Frankish Empire, the Carolingian Empire, he was crowned king of the Holy Roman Empire on Christmas Day 800. Charlemagne's profound influence on the Middle Ages and influence on the territory he ruled has led him to be called the Father of Europe. When discussing modern Europe, you begin at Charlemagne. You have the Romans, the fall of the Romans, the Dark Ages, Charlemagne, Europe. He is the beginning. France, the Franks, are the beginning of this period of Europe. However, Charlemagne's empire was hard fought and short-lived. Charlemagne, like Alexander the Great, was a man of great personal, I think they officially call it charisma, but just the force of his personality created a thing. And those behind him just didn't possess that same power. So upon his death, his kingdom was split up into 3 parts. And it was after his children sort of began some infight, and just power tends to go to people's heads. Even though their father set them all up, they did a great job of just blowing the whole goddamn thing. And I say all that for a reason. But we're not going to get there yet. But these are all things you need to keep in the back of your head. The Frankish Empire, under Charlemagne, crowned on Christmas Day in the year 800. Remember all of these things. Coming through the darkness and into the light of modernity, Charlemagne, who did not last. And the Holy Roman Empire was crowned the Holy Roman Empire, but he was always the king of the France. The Holy Roman Empire wouldn't really become a thing for another 100 years or so until it be under Otto the First, Second, Otto the Great. Let's call him Otto the Great. That's where the Holy Roman Empire really took off. But officially, 800 is the start date. And I say all that because I told you it's impossible to understand Revelation if you don't understand John. And it's impossible to understand Jesus if you don't understand John. It's impossible to understand lots of things. If you don't understand, it's literally impossible to understand European history if you don't understand John. And I say all that because who wrote the book of Revelation? John of Patmos. Now the common consensus is John of Patmos was the old beloved apostle of Jesus, who had somehow found himself cast away to this island of Patmos. Where he wrote the book of Revelation. Let's take a look at the beginning of the book of Revelation, shall we? John, meaning I'm John and I'm writing this to these 7 churches which are in Asia. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm over here talking about Europe, and that's pointed in the other direction. In fact, we didn't get there. I was going to do it, and I haven't got there yet, but the Jacob story, I got all the way up to the part where Jacob flees. And then the next part was where he wrestles with an angel. And they wrestle all night. And at the end of the match, the angel sees that it can't beat Jacob. Only we call it, like, a lot of people think it's Jesus or God, even though it says the angel, but that's not one of them. But the angel realizes it can't beat Jacob, so it separates the hip and changes his name to Israel. And if I had finished that video, which eventually I will do, I would make the claim that, like the rib and the ark and the serpent and the beasts of the field and many, many, many other things, that the separating hip is in fact it's a visual cue of a separation between an idea that this thing is now disconnected and separated. And this separated thing is now called Israel, even though it used to be called Jacob. And then earlier I did make the claim that Jacob was in fact the Roman Empire. So if you separate the Roman Empire at the hip, I would go on to explain that the hip looks an awful lot like where Europe and Asia meet right there at Constantinople, and they became separated. So then I would say that this is actually a representation of the split of the Eastern and Western Roman Empire, and then how they basically went on to have 2 different lives. One is Jacob and one is Israel. And so you're going to notice as we read the beginning of John and we read other things that Israel is one thing. And I have been saying, and I will continue to say, that Israel is now Europe, where Jacob was Roman Europe. Jacob is now Eastern Europe, and Israel is now the recently fallen, barbarian-ridden, dark age-riddled land of the Goths and the Visigoths and the Franks and the Vandals that turns into modern Europe. That is Israel, and Israel becomes the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 nations that work collectively as separate countries and kingdoms, more specifically, that all followed Jesus and his 12 disciples. But we will get to that. So John begins this writing to the 7 churches which are in Asia. Grace and peace to you from him who is, and who was, and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits which are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler over the kings of the earth. Do you want to see something interesting about that verse? That's often in a sea of weirdness that is Revelation. If you just take a peek at the very beginning and you really just stop hearing everybody else and just read it. Who's talking? We're told it's Jesus. But John is writing to the churches. And he's saying, grace and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come. And from the 7 spirits who are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler. So him who is and was and who is to come and his throne are not Jesus, because they add Jesus to the list. This list, this book, everything is written by, right? Nobody's arguing the fact that John wrote Revelation. That is 1,000% confirmed by every biblical scholar, from the crazy to the academic. It doesn't matter. Everybody's in agreement. And I'm saying the book of Revelation is in many ways about John. And that is a tough one to get your head around, because that is not the story you were told. It's about Jesus. And it is about Jesus, but it isn't about Jesus. Let me prove my point. He goes on to say, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, says the Lord. John is what I'm claiming, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. John, not Jesus in this particular case. John, strangely enough, with Jesus, his witness. Now, he is Jesus' witness, but in this case, Jesus is his witness. Interesting reversal that often, in fact, I've never heard anybody notice that before, but it is right there for you to see. So how in the fuck? Because this is not a little claim this I am making. This is a large claim. This is a, like, there's contrarian, and there's just downright asshole. This is an asshole move on my part. John is the Alpha and Omega. John is the beginning and the end. The beginning and the end of what? The beginning and the end of the throne of Jesus, the firstborn of the dead and the ruler of the kings of the earth. John is the beginning and the end of that. He's not Jesus. He tells you that, but he is the beginning and he is the end. It's kind of, it's kind of sad, but it's not. You have to understand the concept before you understand the pieces of the concept. John is the Alpha. John is the beginning of the age of kings. The throne. The kings of the earth. John, the kings of Israel. Who is the father? Who's the father of modern Europe through kings, right? That Europe, not the republic, democracy, Western thing you see now, but the part of Europe, the fairy tale part of Europe. Where does that begin officially? France. Charlemagne, the Franks. The father of Europe, the beginning, the Alpha. And where does modern Europe, like modern Europe, what's the end of the high Middle Ages? Where's the beginning of modernity? Where does that officially, the nation state? Where's the nation state as opposed to the kingdom? Who is the father of nations? Charlemagne was the father of the kings. In fact, every king in Europe traces their lineage to Charlemagne. Our friend King Charles of England is king because when you do the king math, the amount of blood he shares with Charlemagne is the greatest of all monarchs left on earth. Now we can argue that his power as a monarch is all but gone, but so are all the other monarchs, right? So there's no true kings of Europe. There may be some guys lingering in there with some duties, but the power has been moved on to the nations, the states, the democracies. And where did that begin? The French Revolution. Not the German Revolution, not the Italian Revolution, not the British Revolution, not the Irish, the French Revolution. The Alpha and Omega of the kings of Israel. It's from France to France. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. He was accused of being the Son of God, but he calls himself the Son of Man. My entire shtick is that man means nation, and God means humanity and the people. So therefore, a son of man would be the father of the nation, the beginner of that era. He's the progenitor of the countries, the Abraham, if you will, or in this case, John the Baptist, the man in the wilderness crying out, a man crying out in the wilderness who comes before Jesus and is compared to Jesus. He is nothing, but he must prepare the way. So the way preparer. Moses leads you to the promised land, but Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus brings you in. So in many ways, I'm not claiming this, but if you want to understand, like, John the Baptist is a Moses-like figure. He took them out of the Germanic people, took them out of Egypt and carried them through the wilderness of the Dark Ages. But in this case, John the Baptist is like late Dark Ages, early high Middle Ages, whatever you would call that period where it's no longer the Dark Ages, medieval. But essentially, the Son of Man is the bringer of the new age. And what is Jesus talking about? He's talking about the end of the age will look like this. These are the things that will happen at the end of the age. So the end of the age must necessitate the beginning of the age. Now, John of Patmos, John the Revelator, he witnesses the end of the age. But John the Baptist, he witnesses the rise of the age. So from John to John, from beginning to end, from Alpha to Omega, France, John is the one that does it. I, John, both your brother and companion in the tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was on the island that is called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus. So he's on an island. He's on an island. What is an island? Like, let's just, literally, an island would be Hawaii. An island would be Corsica. We think an island, there's an island called Patmos, and they probably named an island somewhere Patmos because that's what they do. But an island is surrounded by sea. A dry land surrounded by sea. And what is the sea? The sea would be global commerce. And what was Europe at the time of the French Revolution? Europe was embroiled in global expansionism, global trade, right? That was the global colonial period. And what happened to France is they did some of that, and then shit went down, and the bloody French Revolution occurred. And you know what no longer happened at that point? For a while, it sort of became its own isolated ball of insanity. It was an island. An island of mortality, separated from the world. And if you remember the other part of Revelation, where you had the people that were killed, and then you had those that weren't killed that were associated with death. And so killed Death is associated with wealth and prosperity, democracy in Egypt. But to be killed, to be mortal, mortality, that's not death. That's to kill. That's this other thing, right? So if it's the opposite of death, but it's not life, right? Life is a different thing. So there's a third thing that pertains to being mortal, if you will. So John was stuck on an island of mortality in a sea of Egypt. Patmos, mortality. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing. And I'm going to read this. Like, we're talking about John the Baptist and John in general, but I find it difficult to read the Bible now without, like, getting all, like, wild-eyed. Because it's the phrases. It's the phrases. If you understand, like, just take the literalness and just put it aside. Save it for later when I'm not here. But just try this. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. Forget heaven. Like, heaven's like angels and hell, and there's too much baggage. Think of heaven in the simplest possible way you can. Heaven is up here. Hell is down here. Heaven is up here. Earth is down here. Heaven is above. Heaven is on top. Heaven is the highest point. If we're talking that men are metaphors of nations, if a nation is in heaven, it is on top. It is the lead nation. It's part of the high nations. Like, America would be the number one place in heaven. England 100 years ago was heaven. 100 years before that, France was near the top. Right before the French Revolution, which was right in the thing with all the Joseph stuff. And I said the French Revolution was the baker and the butler, right? It's all connected. It's all connected. It's just, you just have to, it isn't connected if you don't understand what it's saying. But if you understand all the words and how it's fucking genius. Holy shit, it's genius. So, after these, a door standing open in heaven. There was an opening in the rulership, the number one nation status, which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me. I heard was like a trumpet. That is an allusion to the trumpets, which occur later, which I had said previously in my 6th trumpet video, that the trumpets represented industrialization. And when did the industrialization begin? It began in the late early 1800s. You know, right around the French Revolution and the arrest of Jesus that we'll come to later. So the trumpet, it's saying, and the first voice I heard was like a trumpet, the beginning of industrialization, modernization. saying, come up here and I will show you things which must take place after this. After what? After industrialization, after the French Revolution, after this hole in heaven was created, this opening, this door standing open is the revolt of the people against the king. Immediately I was in the spirit, in the spirit, in the spirit. I just dropped a video. It's called The Darkness Before Dawn, the Dawn. I wasn't sure what I was doing while I was doing it. It began with me. I have a thing about John the Baptist, and I wasn't sure how to take it to the next place. So I realized at the end, I was essentially creating poetry. But it's not poetry in the traditional prose and verse. I was creating, like, if poetry is, it's an attempt to, like, they would use word play and short phrases and in visual language to, like, invoke thoughts and feelings within a person, right? In a form that is other than a story, right? So this quick, so you could grasp a much larger idea if you sat and, like, contemplated, which modern man is not doing. But at the time of poetry's, like, height, people would sit and reflect for hours upon a simple poem, and they would come to these conclusions, and you would be, like, powerfully moved by a couple of sonnets. And I was grappling with this concept of preparing the way in the wilderness, the one that came first. And you have to get your head around what it means too, because there's a literalness to the idea of France as the beginning and the end of the reign of kings in Europe, right? That is literally true. But there's also a deeper Dionysian concept at play that is, what is the beginning and what is the end? Tohu vohu. This idea of the chaos and darkness that God created the world from. Like, in some ways, the beginning and the end is also chaos. Because chaos, at the end of a thing, just unravels, like the Dionysian chaos unravels the Apollonic order, so that it falls apart and descends, and outside forces that have been kept out can now come in and finish the job of slaying the beast, if you will. And at the same time, without the destruction of the order will always keep at bay a new order. So in order for a new thing to emerge, you must destroy the old thing. Whether that's on purpose or an accident, it's not what we're talking about. So the chaos creates the medium for new order. Because you can't get order out of order, but you can get chaos out of chaos. So chaos is the driver and the destroyer. And it starts to, like, invoke, in some ways, in many ways, in almost every way. Because you're literal, you think the ancients were literal, and you think all their gods were literal, and you think all of them were dumb fucking pieces of shit that couldn't think for themselves. When in fact, the opposite is true. They were goddamn geniuses who fucking did this shit. If you have a god of chaos, or a storm god, or you at least respected the concept of Dionysus, and you were able to encapsulate all of the things that chaos does, right? It comes into town on a donkey, drinks itself silly with all its friends, who then consume him and destroy him and leave him for dead, at which point he rematerializes as a new, fresh thing and moves on. Like, they get it, they got it, they understood this. He didn't reign for long, he didn't stay for long, but when he came, it was a party. It was a blood-soaked party for sure. So the beginning is the chaos, because the end is the chaos. So you have to go through the chaos to get to the order. John is not fit. He's not Jesus, and he's not fit to tie the sandals of Jesus. And he's not, because Jesus is something higher. But John is... So, if you're in a world of chaos, if you're in a world of darkness, the Dark Ages, you would need to be a bad motherfucker in order to become Charlemagne. If you're surrounded by like uncouth barbarian tribe after uncouth barbarian tribe and you kick all their asses, you must be a fucking badass. But the difference is, Charlemagne was both a badass murderer and he was obsessed with the ancients and order and the higher things. And he reinstituted learning. And so like, but without his cruelness and his aggression, the ark could not be built. The temple could not be created. Jesus could not emerge until somebody had slayed the darkness and had gone the darkness before the dawn. The chaos. Somebody had to defeat the chaos, the order that comes out. So John is chaos to chaos, and John is order to order, and Jesus is the order in between. Now there's countries associated with all that, but I say all that because it's all connected, right? You have to see it all. You can't see a door standing open in heaven if you haven't fucked up the system, right? A door in heaven is bad. There couldn't be a worse thing. There couldn't be a worse societal thing than a door in heaven. You don't want a door in heaven. We call this particular door in heaven the reign of terror, and they cut people's heads off on the street. A door in heaven sounds awesome. Like, here he comes. Here he comes is bad. This was bad. This is bad. What emerges, you call great. But it doesn't come from great. Greatness comes through bad. And there's gonna be so much more built on that. So I made a video attempting to, like, you have to feel the insane, like this is not a sexist comment, but like women I don't think will ever fully understand, but there is a primal part of a man that can be switched on. There's like a murderer in all of us that just like with the right, like we are both like wetting ourselves and like ready to spill blood. Like there's a thing and like you're weak until the trigger is flipped, and then now if you just have the trigger flipped and there's no light in you, that's just murderous chaos. But if you become fearless with love and the murderous spirit, there's hope. And it's like, it's a weird thing to get your head around. How can war and killing and bloodshed be beautiful? We're not taught this. It's against everything. But if we don't have a moment of like righteous killing, you can't have peace on earth. You will only have bloody chaos, selfish chaos, rape and murder. So something has to be more aggressive than rape and murder, but it has to be covered with the Holy Spirit. And that's where this is all going, because I was in the Spirit, and that is where I'm trying. This whole thing was to get to the Spirit, because John the Baptist baptizes in water. What was it? I come baptizing in water and something. But Jesus baptizes in spirit and fire. And water is knowledge. And so Charlemagne reboots learning. And he kicks all the asses and reboots learning, right? He has now created an environment for Jesus, who is in the spirit and fire. So he is technology. He is like, if water is the knowledge, technology, and fire, and industry, and manufacturing, and like, that's the product from the knowledge. So the knowledge gets you so far, but the application of the knowledge is the fire. And in the spirit, but so they're doing it in the spirit of, like, let's call it righteous aggression. It's not peace and love. It's war and love. It's a weird one. Peace brings weakness, and weakness brings chaos. Strength brings order. So in the spirit of loving strength, how about that? So the Spirit is this, the Holy Spirit is aggressive love. It's like the thing that brings the golden age comes from the dark age. So the best moment will always follow the worst moment. Good times makes weak men, weak men make bad times make hard times make strong men make good times. Like, it's that whole thing. They're just telling you before all. They're telling you in 2000 years ago, and they're telling you in 100 AD or 100, 200 AD, whatever it is that this was written. I was in the spirit. The French Revolution was in a spirit of righteous, in their mind, right? They were no longer going to be civil society. They were no longer going to be quiet, law-abiding citizens. They were going to be murderous motherfuckers who went ahead and just got things done. They were tired of the system destroying them, and they destroyed the system. But that's in the Spirit. So it's not pretty. The Holy Spirit it's not just falling on the floor and pretending to be knocked out by the Spirit at church because the song really moves you. It's something deeper. When witnessed, it's awe-inspiring and terrifying. The terror of the Lord is no joke. They're not just words said without meaning. But let's go back to this. I'm going to skip this part in the middle because there's a whole lot happening here. But do notice that there was a rainbow around the throne. And where do we get a rainbow from? We get a rainbow from Noah. And what did I say Noah was? Noah was this moment when the Akkadians, whoever they were, destroyed the Sumerians, whoever they were. And you had this destruction of, like, the ultimate king out of control. And you had essentially a popular uprising of the people, which paved way, an arc for the Akkadian Empire to step in and flourish for a while. So the rainbow was given to you by God as a promise that if you got out of hand, we'd fucking kill you. That's what the rainbow is. It's a promise to kill you if you fuck this up. And I saw a rainbow around the throne. You mean the throne that was now standing open because the people just fucking cut the head off the goddamn king? There's a rainbow. It's at the end of an age. The age of kings is now beginning to be over. And so the arrest of Jesus is essentially the ending of the reign of kings. From his arrest and his trial and his crucifixion to the end of World War II at the death of Jesus, where the temple of Europe is split in two, right? You just think it's 3 actual days. It's 3 metaphorical, like, the concepts are there. And from the throne, the now empty throne, there proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. Lightnings and thunderings, and sometimes it's earthquakes. And so basically, you have a mass amount of noise and movement happening from heaven that just came to earth. If heaven comes to earth, watch the fuck out. If Jesus ascends to heaven, things are going to be rosy. If Jesus returns to earth, watch out. That's bad. That's literally you will probably die. But the other way, you will probably have a 401k and a college education and be bored because you just have nothing to watch. These words mean things. So that's what I just said. His countenance was like the sun. So, okay, that was the other one that I missed. So what comes out of it is... where did I see? There was a rainbow around the end, apparently, and I saw fire. And so the 7 lamps of fire were burning. So what comes out of the chaos are the 7 lamps and a fire. So out of the French Revolution begins the essentially the industrialized world in the beginning of these 7 trumpets and these 7 things, and the fire again is the fire, right? So baptized in water but born of the spirit and fire. The fire again is the technology. So what came out of the ending of kings and the age of enlightenment? You got science and technology and electricity and modernism, right? So shining like the sun. Who shines like the sun? Who is the sun? Pharaoh. And so now you have Pharaoh and Joseph is democracy, and democracy comes from the end of monarchy. And you can see that all of the stories connect, and there's a beginning of Pharaoh and there's a beginning of Joseph, and they all align at the exact same time, and there's an end of monarchies, and there's a process to get there, and that is what the story is beginning with. So Revelation is beginning with the French Revolution. And if I had time, I would show you that the person that sat there was like jasper and sardis stone, literally the French flag. But these are both red, but I'd have to get into Sardis and how that's a town full of blue dye, and we don't even need to go down that road right now. And then before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne, around the throne, were 4 living creatures, a lion, a calf, a man, and an eagle. And the creatures had 6 wings and full of eyes around, and they did not rest. So this is not unlike Ezekiel. It had a lion and an ox, not a calf. It had a lion and an ox and a man and an eagle. This one has a lion and a calf and a man and an eagle. And these are like the stages. First you have this king, this Napoleon, that creates a calf, and an ox are like, the cow is the thing, is like the supermarket of the ancient times. So the lion gives way to the economy, and the economy gives way to this new nation, the man, and the man gives way to the flying eagle, this new. What is an eagle? An eagle is a bird. And what is a bird? What is a bird of the air? A bird of the air is the elite. And so now you have the new elite, the new strong, aggressive, high-minded, intelligent elite. But first it comes from the lion that destroys, and the calf that produces, and the man that structures, and the elites that enlarge, right? So it's all right there. And there's more of the sea of glass. What is the sea? The sea is commerce and world economy. And glass, what is glass? Glass is literally hot sand. And sand is how much it was like the sand of the sea. And you put the sand of the sea under intense heat, under intense industrialization, under intense technology, and what do you get? You get a sea of glass. You get a global world trade based on new science and technology that are all associated with death, which is wealth and prosperity. Because Jesus died. So out of the death, and that's another thing so when Jesus dies, it means that the time of harvest is near. So the living God is the God of the beginning. But once you go through the growing part, the strong part, then you can get to the part where all of that hard work pays off and you go into prosperity. Death is prosperity. When Jesus died, the ages of kings brings the prosperity, and ironically it brings the end of kings because of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and the American Revolution and the revolutions of 1848. And all of those things all line up. And so I'm just throwing too much at you at one time, but I'm trying to get to one final place. This is all great because this is all what I just said, right? His eyes were the eyes and the flame. So his head and his hair were like wool, as the white as snow. So number one, that invokes a couple of things. One is he's old. It's not a new thing, it's an old thing. So death comes at the end of the living cycle. Like wool, he's a sheep. He's no longer an aggressive lion. He's now the sheep. He's not part of the people, right? So the peace comes at the old age, which brings the flame of technology, and the height and the abundance finally is going to, like, all of that hard work of the Middle Ages of producing these things. The modern age is the reward for the hard work of the living, the building, the creating portion. So once the creating is over, the dying ensues. And the dying is when you consume the body that grew. But the problem is you can only consume for so long. Hence the other video I made about consuming. You can consume until you can't consume anymore, because Dionysus' friends can only eat him until all his flesh is gone. Right, so there's the dead part. You celebrate the life when dead. But when you rise from the dead, watch out. He was refined in a furnace. So these are all words: fire, flame, furnace. These are all industrialization. The sound of many waters. Tremendous amount of learning. What is water? Water is knowledge. Many knowledges. What did the Age of Enlightenment bring? Science, technology, knowledge. Everybody's so smart now because in the 1800s, they figured all the shit out. because the king part was over and they had freedom to think, and they had a safe environment to learn, and they had created a world finally strong enough and peaceful enough to devote themselves to thinking, not just murdering and eating. Right? And I fell at his feet as dead, right? So John now dies. John fell at the angel's feet. John fell as dead. These aren't just like descriptive words. Literally, France, after Napoleon dies, becomes the center of the European elite world, the art world, the like all Paris becomes this like modern thriving city because Napoleon cleared the way, right? So John fell at his feet as if dead. True, 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 true. Do not be afraid. I am the beginning and the end, the first, the last. I am he who lives and was dead. So John, through the French Revolution, becomes alive again because he had been dead through the Sun King Louis XIII global expansionism. You see what I'm saying? Of course you don't. And then finally, sort of to wrap this up, maybe you're finally getting what I'm saying. And I haven't even gotten to the meat. I've just sort of laid the table. But take a look at this. Because if John is Charlemagne, and John is the French Revolution, and John is the beginning of Europe, and John is the end of monarchical Europe, and the beginning of the modern state, John is also one of the two witnesses. And I would have to go to John, and what is... Somebody calls John the Baptist on the carpet and they says, are you the Messiah? Are you this? Are you that? He goes, no, I am just a witness of Jesus. I am the one that comes before baptizing by fire or by water. So he's a witness. And he says it over and over again. I'm a witness. I'm a witness. I'm a witness to Jesus. I witness Jesus, right? So that is John, and we'll get to that. So there's two witnesses. This is where it gets crazy. So maybe you're all on board. Maybe you're like, fuck it, he's right. Maybe you're on board, but you're about to get off. I'm trying to do Pisces. We are in the age of Pisces. We're in the age of two fish. We all know about one fish being Ichthus and Jesus. Nobody has a problem. But like every esoteric person will tell you that the entire book of, or the Gospels, or the whole Bible in general, or the New Testament for sure, or the Gospels specifically, are all talking about astral theology, and it's all just a metaphor of the sun and the constellations and the precession of the equinox. I'm aware of these things. I know we are in the age of Pisces. We're in the age of two fish. We came from the age of Aries and Taurus, and we're headed towards the age of Aquarius. A man pouring out the jugs of water. And if you read the Bible, you can go see that clearly. We are headed towards Aquarius, towards an age of so much knowledge that it just defines the age. Sounds familiar. I can go with that. But before that, you had two fish. Two fish. Jesus had 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed the 5,000. There's two witnesses. Two witnesses. I love how they use 11. It's not an accident. These people are geniuses. Two. 2 ones is an 11. 2. 11 is also the number of Pharaoh and so many other things. So we won't even get into that. 9/11 didn't happen on 9/11 because it was an accident. The sign of all of 101. They didn't build 2. I'll do that one day. 2 witnesses. And I want to read this. So then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood saying, "Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands standing before God of the earth. If anyone wants to do harm from them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. If anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. These have the power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy, and they have power over waters to turn them to blood and strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire." 2 witnesses. And if you even remotely studied the book of Revelation, well, the 2 witnesses are Moses and Elijah. They never died. The 2 witnesses are all these Bible people. The 2 witnesses, the 1260 days stems from, and then there's then you got to go to the book of Daniel, and you got to do this, and you got to do that, and you start doing Revelation math, and you got to go find when Nebuchadnezzar made a proclamation for the Jews to return home, and all of a sudden it's about Jews again, and has nothing. I'm saying the story is about John as 1 witness, which is the crazy part, because I haven't told you there's another witness. There's 2 of them. One of them is John. John represents the witness of Jesus in Europe. 1. And how long? So just to do this real quick, just to add to that flavor, I will give my power to them 1,260 days. And I just said that 1,800 is a good round number to call the end of this age. 1,800. I also said that 800 is a good age to say it begins. One could say the reign of Jesus, the reign of the good king, the reign of the kings, of the shepherds of Israel. We'll get into that. It's exactly 1,000 years. So from December 25th, 1800, when Charlemagne was crowned a Holy Roman Empire, to December 25th, 1800, when the Napoleonic forces forced the abdication in all but name of the Holy Roman Empire before a battle, only to just barely survive as a non-real thing for 4 more years or 7 more years before it finally gave up and ended literally a 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ on earth. Ends at the arrest of kings, the arrest of the idea of a monarchy acting on the people's behalf, so that the people can steal the right of rule for themselves, but in fact are sold out to money. But that's another. But if you take, so we'll call the end date 1800. So if you go to 1,260 days of the witnesses prophesying, the witnesses. John was the witness of Jesus. He was unworthy of Jesus, but he cleared the way. He prepared the wilderness, the dark ages, for the rise of the enlightened, illuminated, cathedral building, Renaissance having, enlightenment gaining, science creating world, right? That came from the aggressive, angry John. So 1,260 years from the end date of Kings. And let's call years, days and years, synonymous in this. That takes you to 540. And in the world of esoteric Jewish things, that equates to jack shit. It doesn't, is unhelpful. That's part of the reason Revelation math will drive men wild and murder their souls, is they're looking for answers in all the wrong places. But 540 is a perfect number, as if somebody knew. Hey, look, even AI knows. That is considered the worst year. Around that is considered one of the worst years in history, because that is also essentially the beginning of the Dark Ages. When did Rome fall? It's a range. 476 is given, 532 is given, 536 is given. Let's just say worst case scenario, the darkest of the dark goes till 540, and then the darkness continues, but it's through the darkness. So Jesus is not crowned in 540. Charlemagne is not crowned in 540. But the groundwork is laid for the darkness they grow through. The wilderness begins in 540 because the civilization has ended, and wilderness is literally code word for uncivilized. So the uncivilized, the wilderness, John was one leading the way in the wilderness, crying out in the wilderness, right? So the end of the crying out is Charlemagne, the beginning of the rise of civilization. So when does that truly begin? 540 is a great date. So for 1,260 years, kings rule Europe. No emperor, no republics, just kings. And at first they're barbaric, and eventually they're just. And what do we even teach our kids is like the greatest moment ever is like chivalry and the good king. And so there is a moment in there that is a beautiful thing. The true philosopher kings do exist for a handful of years. Jesus, the perfect man, does emerge in this. But Jesus is betrayed and Barabbas comes out. Like, there's a lot to this. So 540 to 1800, 1,260 years. According to a Google AI overview. So that is a perfect date, a perfect amount of years. But we do have one problem. One glaring, weird problem that I'm not going to answer today. There's two witnesses, and I just said John is only one. Because it's going to lead into the weirdest part of the weirdest part. The New Testament says there's 5 Johns, and we've been able to identify Patmos John, Baptist John, but there's a couple other Johns in the middle. John is the father of Simon. Well, who the fuck is Simon? Simon Peter. John the Beloved? Is that like, Versailles, France, maybe? John the Evangelist? Is that the same as John the Baptist? And Jesus had 2 fish. Or Pisces is 2 fish. And I'm going to say now, not only is there Europe Jesus, in Europe, John, to do with Egypt. Sodom is associated with an eastern Mediterranean, Syrian, Lebanese, Israel coastline area. Egypt is associated with the West. Sodom is associated with the East. So how is it when you kill two witnesses, they lie in two places? We know that on John's end, the witnesses for sure go to Egypt. They go to democracy. They go to abundance. They go to tribulation. They go to industrialization. They lay on the streets dead in Egypt. What the fuck is the Sodom about? And you gotta go way, 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 way back to Abraham and realize that Sodom is the Egypt of the East. And if one witness is on the West, well, then the other witness must be in the East. Which then, if you have Pisces, one fish, a little creature swimming in the sea. And there's more than that, and in the water, whether that's knowledge or industry or commercialization, there's one fish that is one Jesus and one John and one Egypt, which means there's another Jesus and another John and a Sodom. And so we have a split of Israel and Jacob. We have a split. There are two Jesuses. And two Johns. Two revelations and two witnesses. And two deaths, two resurrections. Because there's twins. There's two. There's the West and the East. And if Western civilization gets claimed, like Judaism claims Abraham in the Old Testament, and Christianity claims Europe. Is that a rightful claim? Is that biblical? Or is that just a bunch of women being seduced by a serpent and imposing themselves onto the king? And if that's true in the West, through Christianity, so I'm saying that Jesus is not Christianity. That is probably also true in the East, where there is also a woman doing the same thing. So you were going to think it's the religion, but it's the people, not the religion. It's the man, not the woman. And there's so much more. So we'll get into the second witness, because there's Elijah, and he had his... And Elijah was responsible for the destruction of the prophets of Baal. And if I said Elijah was actually... It's like a spirit of destructive chaos that destroys the evil. Let's call Elijah the West. But he had a disciple. In the West falls what? 476, 400 to 500, 400 to 540. That's Elijah. Elijah is the destruction of the West. But what about the East? After that, was there another destructive force in the East that had the double anointing that he forced out of Elijah? Was there a second destructive chaotic force that actually opened the door for a new order in the East after the fall of the Western Roman Empire? The destruction of Israel while Judah kept going, and then the ultimate destruction of Judah in Babylon, Egyptian, Babylonian. You see how all of a sudden they come together. There's so many things happening if you just let go of what so let's call Elijah and the second witness. You know, the house where Jesus went in Sidon that he didn't want anybody to see him entering. I have other places you don't know about. In fact, in John it says, John is my witness, but there is another greater witness that you have never seen nor heard. What? Who's this? He's the other witness. Maybe it's the Arabs rising up out of nowhere, destroying the old Byzantine thing, one conquest at a time. But we'll get to that. I think I've given you more than enough to stew on. John the Baptist, the darkness emerging into the dawn.